welcome anybody that wants to come and join us tonight who's interested in left politics, who is interested to hear Alex Nunns speak, and to find out more about why Alex wrote the candidates and why he's now on his second version of the book, which I believe was updated from the general election. Alex is here partially as well because it is election time, and we're trying to also enthuse people to come out for the last 3 weeks of training. We've got lots of really decent left candidates in Camden and beyond. Just a few weeks now until May the 3rd. Thank you.
Hello everybody, right volume. Thank you for inviting me. That's what I look like on a good day, about 200% scale, and that's who I wrote the this book about. I want to take you back to a few seconds before 10 PM on the 8th of June last year. You might have been watching BBC One, waiting for the results of the exit poll to come out, maybe with some trepidation, I don't know. Jeremy Corbyn, at that point, was at home in Islington with his wife, Laura Alvarez, his chief of staff, Carrie Murphy, who's a kind of strong-willed, red-haired Glaswegian, and his director of strategy, Seamus Milne, who was very famous since a few weeks ago when the Press Association decided to name him. I actually interviewed Carrie Murphy for this book, and she told me about that night and what was going on in Jeremy's house. And her main memory was that she said, Jeremy's got a tiny television. None of your big fancy screens on the wall, forget all that. A tiny TV on a pile of books. Isn't that just the most Jeremy Corbyn thing you've ever heard? And she said Seamus and Jeremy were standing right in front of the TV, it's that small. Actually, she said it's that wee. None of them there knew what was about to happen. They hadn't been tipped off about the result of the exit poll or anything like that. Jeremy asked them all to write down their predictions on a piece of paper of what was going to happen. Carrie Murphy was the most optimistic. She'd been actually saying for weeks that Labour was going to win the election, talking about what they were going to do when they got into number 10. She wrote down 39%. Apparently Jeremy was the second most optimistic, but they won't tell me what the figure he wrote down was. Seamus was a bit less optimistic. They'd all been kind of tempered, their optimism had been tempered a bit by party's private polling. The party employed BMG as their pollster, and BMG was saying on the day that Labour was going to get 33%, which would have meant a huge Tory majority. On TV, David Dimbleby was wittering on over some hyperactive background music, and then he said, there are just over 20 seconds to go until Big Ben strikes 10. By the magic of psephology, we're able to predict what we think has happened tonight. And he stopped talking, and he turned to face this kind of giant image of Big Ben. The hyperactive background music stopped, and there was this weird pause for a kind of second, where nobody was saying anything, there was no sound. And in that 1 second pause, the fate of the Labour Party, of Jeremy Corbyn's leadership, and of the movement which had come together around him, really hung in the balance. Most people thought that the risk that Labour had taken in electing Jeremy Corbyn twice was about to be shown to be a catastrophic mistake. All of the effort that hundreds of thousands of people have poured in over 2 years could have been for nothing. And then Big Ben bombed, the clock face on the screen dissolved into a picture of Theresa May. The graphic read Conservatives' largest party, but David Dimbleby said, no, they don't have an overall majority at this stage. And at that moment, and with those words, British politics was turned on its head. In Jeremy Corbyn's house, there were gasps. Seamus Milne exclaimed, hung Parliament. The others said, somebody said, oh my God, and there were some other words which weren't quite as polite as well. And then we went from there to where we are today. But the result was extraordinary. Labour obviously didn't win the election, but it did record the biggest increase in vote share of any party in any election since 1945. Jeremy Corbyn became the only Labour leader other than Tony Blair to break the 40% barrier since 1970. Dizzying 12.9 million people voted Labour. Apart from in the 1997 landslide, Labour hadn't won so many votes since 1966. And it was the second highest vote that Labour has ever achieved in England, even bigger number of votes than 1997, which when you consider that Blair's whole appeal was that you could appeal to Middle England is quite something. Those numbers would obviously usually have meant a Labour government, were it not for the Tories basically absorbing half of the UKIP vote based on their position on Brexit. But their vote was actually quite extraordinary, at 13.6 million, and that would usually have meant a huge majority for them. So it took something spectacular from the Labour Party to stop them. that happened, that spectacular surge which we saw for Labour, happened all in the space of 7 weeks in the election campaign, which broke all the electoral rules. You're not supposed to be able to do that. Labour gained somewhere between 11 and 16 percentage points in the polls. And remember, that was against the backdrop of 2 horrendous terrorist attacks and an ongoing civil war in the party. So it's quite a remarkable achievement. All of the political commentators, or nearly all of the political commentators, were dumbfounded. Almost universally, they predicted disaster. Dan Hodges, one of the great thinkers of our time, he tweeted in the early weeks of the election, Labour's vote is completely imploding and a significant portion of it is switching directly to the Conservatives. And he predicted that Labour was going to win 20% of the vote, which, to be fair to him, was half right. It was exactly half what Labour got. Nick Cohen asked, can Labour MPs declare independence from Corbyn and run as a separate party, or do they in this country have to go down with the fall? An ITV journalist in one of Jeremy Corbyn's early press conferences kind of reflected the media consensus when she asked, you say you speak for the many, not the few, but only very few people believe you. Even right up to election day, even despite the change in the polling, the kind of our wisest political experts were still predicting a big win for the Tories. John Rentoul said that the Tories would win 78 by a majority of 78. Piers Morgan went for a majority of 90 to 100. Dan Hodges, who is never to be outdone when it comes to getting something wrong, he opted for 110, and as we know, the Tories lost their majority altogether. So how's it done? I argue in this book that the election result was an expression of the same phenomenon that brought Jeremy Corbyn to the fore in the first place, which is quite convenient because most of my book, the first edition, was about that, so that helped me out. But I do think it's true. I think one reason why all of those commentators called it so wrong was because they'd been absolutely determined not to understand what had happened in the Labour Party over 2 years. They had a kind of tendency to see the Labour Party as a controlled experiment. So you could observe this strange phenomenon that was happening and you could remark on it and record it, but you didn't really need to have to explain it or understand it because Labour was bound for electoral defeat anyway. There was, I remember early in the election, kind of talking head on Sky saying everybody who's going to vote for a Jeremy Corbyn-led Labour Party is already a member of it. That was their kind of view. Back in the real world, obviously when you're talking about an organisation which grew to over 500,000 members, it should have been obvious, but it wasn't. The Labour Party wasn't a controlled experiment, it was part of society made up of people who were living in their communities and experiencing the same frustrations and pressures as their neighbours and colleagues. And it was always possible that if those people had decided that the best response to the political circumstances they were living through in 2015 was to elect Jeremy Corbyn leader of the Labour Party, a wider proportion of the public could have come to the same conclusion. But that's the possibility that was completely ruled out, essentially, by the commentariat. Yet that's exactly what happened in the 2017 general election. 71% of the voters that Labour gained in June 2017 believed that the establishment had let them down, which was a higher proportion than the general population. And I think that Labour Party members have tapped into that sentiment in 2015, and that's one reason why they'd chosen Jeremy Corbyn to be their leader in the first place. So let's go back to 2015, and that's because that's the breakthrough that really broke the ossified shell of British politics. And it's a more surprising result, really, that Jeremy Corbyn was elected leader of the Labour Party than that Labour secured 40% of the vote in the general election. So how was it done? History, I think, it's all about the interplay between the context in which things happen and the human agency that kind of pushes events along. People make their own history and circumstances, not of their choosing. The circumstances in 2015, I think, were shaped by the failure of the dominant economic ideology of the day, call it neoliberalism or call it Thatcherism, whatever you want to call it, to recover from the 2008 crash. It was unable to reconstitute itself, and we see that in lots of phenomena around us, the housing crisis and so on. That event transformed the terrain of politics. I describe it in this book as being like an earthquake which rocked the buildings above, but it didn't quite bring them down. We're still surrounded by all the same structures of power, but they're teetering. They're not quite as secure as they used to be. They're vulnerable. And we're living through a precarious historical moment. And if you trace the Corbyn movement that came together in 2015, you can see that its different tributaries all sprang from resistance to that economic model. And I kind of outlined 3 of them. So there was one of those tributaries that went into the Corbyn movement was through the existing Labour Party itself, the pre-2015 Labour Party, which had turned sharply against New Labour. And I think that's important because there's this myth that the Labour Party in 2015 was done over by outsiders, that all these people flooded in and took the party away from its original members. In actual fact, when the Corbyn campaign in 2015 started to phone canvass Labour Party members, they thought they were freakishly ringing up every single Jeremy Corbyn supporter in the Labour Party because everyone they phoned seemed to be very enthusiastic. Jeremy Corbyn moved into the lead in CLP nominations, decided by people, regular members who go to meetings, a month into the race, ahead of Burnham. And that was before the first opinion poll of the race had shown Jeremy Corbyn was in the lead, before the press lost their heads, before probably 98% of the population knew who Jeremy Corbyn was. He was already ahead amongst Labour Party members. So I think that's an important fact that sometimes gets obscured that we shouldn't lose sight of. The second tributary came through the union movement, and that's a much longer process, I think, a 15-year shift to the left within the trade unions. And I think the cause of that is the trade unions, after the Second World War, had a seat at in the running of industry, a seat at the table in British capitalism, if you like. But Thatcher kicked them out of that role. And that role had really fostered an alliance. It made them, first of all, cautious organisations, but it fostered an alliance between trade union general secretaries and the right wing of the Labour Party, and that's MPs specifically. And that's really how the Labour Party was run after the war. Once Thatcher had booted them out of their economic role, that freed trade unions up to act in different ways politically. And it took a long time, but eventually, by 2015, they got to a position where they were willing to nominate at least the big ones, Unison, Unite, CWU, and there's lots of the smaller left ones, were willing to nominate Jeremy Corbyn to be leader of the Labour Party, which is a very unusual position for them to take historically. And then the third tributary was in the broad left, and that's the kind of non-party members and the anti-austerity movement, particularly from 2010 to 2015, but also the environmental movement, anti-war movement, and so on. And the important thing there was that suddenly they could all vote for £3, and they came into the Labour Party to do that. And I think the Corbyn campaign, interestingly, was pretty much the only leadership campaign in 2015 to consciously reach out to those people. They were ignored by the others. And that was then repeated in the general election with the drive to get new people to register to vote. So that's the context in which everything happened. But still, Jeremy Corbyn couldn't have become leader without agency, chance, and also the errors and miscalculations of opponents. And perhaps the biggest of those was when the Labour Party changed the rules by which it elects its leader in 2014. And without that change, there's no doubt that Jeremy Corbyn couldn't have become leader. But it's one of those brilliant historical ironies where it was a change that was pushed almost entirely by the right of the party and was desperately opposed by the left. And the key thing that it did, I mean, it brought about the £3 registered supporters and so on, but that's actually not the main thing it did. The main thing it did was it replaced the old electoral college with a one-member, one-vote system. So whereas before the vote had been split 33% MPs, 33% members, 30% trade unionists, it was just one member, one vote. And that diminished the power of the MPs, who previously had basically, with 33% of the vote, the MPs had a veto on an outsider candidate winning. But that was regarded slightly differently at the time. I think it's quite fun. I mean, it's funny to look back at some quotes from certain Blairites at the time, bearing in mind, you have to bear in mind, the left also called this completely wrong and opposed it. But anyway, at the time, Tony Blair, 28th of February 2014, he said, "Ed has shown real courage and leadership on this issue. It's a long overdue reform that I should have done myself. It puts individual people in touch with the party, and it's a great way of showing how Labour can reconnect with the people of Britain." Tristram Hunt, who one-time Blairite MP Tristram Hunt, who in 2015 was so devoted to the party that he wanted to lead it, but the other week said he was a floating voter. He said in 8th of May 2015, "One of Ed Miliband's great legacies as leader of the party is the reforms to party organisation, which mean that actually lots of people can be involved in picking the new leader." To be fair to Tristram Hunt, that was true, just didn't quite work out as a plan. John Rentoul, the Blairite columnist for The Independent, 2nd of March 2014, this is the best one. "Miliband's reform is the real thing and it will have real and welcome consequences, whatever the result of the next general election. If Miliband loses, it means the next Labour leader will be a Blairite." He gets paid for that insight. So that rule change really opened the door to somebody from the left standing. But in actual fact, there weren't any volunteers to start with to stand for leader, and Jeremy Corbyn was about the last person anybody thought of. Important people like John McDonnell thought it would be a mistake to stand because they thought they wouldn't get the necessary nominations from MPs to get in the race. It would just be a demoralising defeat. But in the end, there was what John McDonnell calls the wisdom of crowds pushed him into it. People online and so on saying, "We need a candidate, we can't just sit this contest out." But there was still a problem in that no one wanted to do it. John McDonnell didn't want to stand. Michael Meacham didn't want to stand. John Trickett didn't want to stand. There were a bunch of new MPs who'd just been elected in 2015 but they were considered too inexperienced to stand for leader. But nevertheless, some activists were willing to ask them, and somebody was pestering Clive Lewis, saying, "Will you stand for leader?" He replied, "I don't even know where the toilets are in Parliament. I can't remember." For a while last year, it looked like Clive had found the toilets, but it's holding him. And in the end, there was a meeting between John Landsman, who everybody knows, and a guy called Byron Taylor, who's the national officer, was the national officer for the Trade Union Labour Party Liaison Organisation, bringing together affiliated unions. And they met at a reception in Parliament, and John Landsman was telling Byron Taylor, we need a candidate, we haven't got anybody willing to stand. And Byron Taylor said, "It's got to be Jeremy. He's the nicest man in politics and he hasn't got any enemies." He does seem to have made some. But that insight proved correct, and it was crucial for Jeremy Corbyn getting on the ballot, because he'd been so relentlessly polite to his colleagues in Parliament that they were willing to, some of them were willing to give him a chance even though they didn't support him. And John McDonnell said that they would never have let him anywhere near the ballot. But it was still that moment, that effort to get 35 MPs to nominate Jeremy Corbyn to stand for leader, that was the crucial moment of agency in this whole history. It took an unprecedented lobbying effort. It was actually the first signs online of what's become quite familiar in the online Corbyn movement, was people tweeting and Facebooking and emailing their MPs and other, any Labour MPs really, and saying, nominate Jeremy Corbyn for leader. And there was also some old-fashioned arm twisting in Parliament. But it still came down to this kind of theatrical scene on the last day when nominations had to be handed in person by MPs in the Parliamentary Labour Party office in Westminster, actual sheets of paper. And they had to get 35 by noon. I think it was the 12th of June 2015. They started today with 18 from before the weekend, and the rest had to come in from MPs who might be travelling down on a train or whatever, who might have said they'd nominate Jeremy, but they could be delayed. Anything could have scuppered this effort. John McDonnell was there, he was in charge of the operation, he had a clipboard, and he was marking off MPs who promised to nominate Corbyn as they came through. With 5 minutes to go, he had noted down 33 names. There were 5, so they needed 2 more. There were 5 MPs who stood in the office of the Parliamentary Labour Party who had they'd all promised that they would nominate Jeremy Corbyn if they were the last one. If you only needed 1 nomination to get over the line. For some reason, there was something terrible about being the 34th nominator, but they were all willing to be the 35th. So it's kind of like a Lewis Carroll situation. It was an absurd situation. There was easily enough support to get Jeremy Corbyn onto the ballot, but none of them would move unless somebody else would move. And they started to get desperate. Jeremy Corbyn was stood outside the office, stopping passing Tory MPs, saying, "Do you want to join Labour for 3 years?" John Landsman was running around trying to get Tom Watson, who was one of these people who promised to help because he wanted nominations in return for his deputy leadership campaign. He actually really didn't want to nominate Jeremy Corbyn, but he was standing texting the MPs who had said they would do it, because he's a kind of fixer, as you know. Even though they were like 2 metres away from him, he was texting saying, "Nominate Jeremy Corbyn." John McDonnell himself actually got down on his knees in the end and said to these 5 MPs, "Please, for the sake of democracy, nominate Jeremy Corbyn." And then John being John, he added a little threat and said, "Members will never forgive you if you don't." The extraordinary thing about this scene is that John McDonnell's clipboard was actually wrong. He'd missed one. They already had 34, and none of this is a classic example of left-wing organisation. None of this needed at all. They were easily on the ballot, but they didn't know it. And so in the end, they got 36, and I think Andrew Smith became the man who went down in history as the guy who put Corbyn on the ballot, but in actual fact, Corbyn was already on the ballot. He didn't need Andrew Smith. And that happened with 10 seconds to go, according to John McDonnell, although Jeremy Corbyn says there were 118 seconds to go, but John's is a better story. So with 10 seconds to go, those nominations came in and Jeremy Corbyn was on the ballot. And he turned out to be the ideal casting. He combined the left's usual unbending adherence to principle with the kind of warmth and generosity and moral sense of purpose, which proved attractive, and also was an extremely good set of attributes to have during the kind of biggest test of the leadership campaign, which was the welfare bill, which you might remember the Tories were bringing forward draconian benefit cuts. Harriet Harman initially wanted to support them, but then the Shadow Cabinet made her abstain, not support. All of the other leadership candidates were in the Shadow Cabinet, so they abstained. Jeremy Corbyn became the only one to oppose those benefit cuts, and that's one of the things that helped his campaign to take off. And then you had all the scenes of the mass rallies, you had the press going into meltdown, you had the social media kind of movement that cohered online. People talk about social media being an alternative to the press. That's very important, but one thing they don't talk about very much is the fact that people who otherwise wouldn't know each other existed, can find each other at different ends of the country and realise they're not alone in their views, and that movement really sprang to life in 2015. And then it came, obviously, in the end, it turned out that Jeremy Corbyn won the leadership with 59.5% of the vote. What that showed is that there were lots of people willing to, who were just waiting really for somebody to express the sentiment that Jeremy Corbyn came to embody. And actually Jeremy Corbyn said that himself. He said, it's not about me, I'm just very honoured to be speaking on behalf of a lot of people who have these views. And for a while people thought that might be true in the Labour Party, but it wasn't true in the general population. And it seemed to be so from opinion polls and so on, but the general election really proved that wasn't the case, that it was a much wider held sentiment. Labour's general election performance last year was quite incredible because behind the scenes there was basically a civil war going on. There had been a civil war ever since Jeremy Corbyn was elected, obviously. In the general election, some of that died down. The MPs didn't make on-the-record briefings against it, even though they continued to say things like the manifestos, the 10-year-olds' Christmas list to Santa Claus, but they did it anonymously, which was very kind of them. Even behind the scenes, even in the bureaucracy itself, there was this battle raging, which ended up with Labour effectively running 2 leadership campaigns in parallel. The Leader's Office wanted to draw on the lessons it had learned from the 2 leadership campaigns in 2015 and 2016. It thought there was a constituency for its message, and then it could boost that constituency by appealing over the heads of the media, through the movement, through social media and so on, and try to kind of galvanise a movement. Labour HQ, the party staff, they had a different idea. They were locked into a really defensive strategy. They had a rational basis for it because the polls were so bad, and they considered that their job was to try and save as much as they could of the Labour Party and come out the other side a bit battered, but still intact. They said it's not possible to shift the vote more than 2 or 3 points during an election campaign. It's not possible to engage non-voters. They're non-voters because they don't vote. There's no point, an official actually said this in one of the meetings we had, there's no point trying to register students to vote because they're going to be broken up by the time of the election. So that's all a waste of time. And this came to a head really at a meeting 5 weeks out from election day between Corbyn's top team and party staff top team, in which Carrie Murphy, Jeremy Corbyn's chief of staff, blasted them. They were all sitting around the table saying, we don't understand the strategy, being all churlish. And she said, you fucking do understand the strategy. You don't like the strategy, you don't want the strategy, but you do know the strategy. But even so, this battle continued to rage, and we see it in where resources were sent. And one of the things I talk about in the book is I happened upon a list that Labour HQ produced of where they were going to send extra resources for social media support and direct mailing support. And it's a list that's ordered in by safeness of the constituency. So the safest Labour seat, Liverpool Walton, is at the top, and obviously that doesn't need extra support, so it doesn't get this extra support. The first person who does get any extra support is Angela Eagle. Even though she's got a majority of 16,000, her seat is marked as marginal. And then you go down low, other MPs don't get any support. The next one you get to is Dan Jarvis. He's got a majority of 12,000, his seat's marked as marginal. Yvette Cooper, you just go through the names, it's incredible you go through these names. When the Leader's Office got hold of this list, one of Corbyn's lieutenants went to somebody who's now left Labour HQ and said, don't spend 1 penny on these people in safe seats. And this staffer said, write me a list of all the MPs you don't want me spending any money on. And Corbyn's lieutenant said, what, so you can put it in the Times? That's basically the atmosphere that was happening behind the scenes. The result of the election decided the argument. It showed it was possible to win non-voters. 38% of the voters that Labour gained in June 2017, which amounts to 2 million people, had not voted in 2015. 1.5 million of those were previous non-voters, the other 500,000 were newly eligible, so 18-year-olds and so on. It was possible to engage young people. Labour won an incredible 60% of the under-30s. In 2015, Labour won 36% of the under-30s, which was quite good, and it was more than the Tories. But that swing from 36% to 60% in 2 years is just something astounding. It was possible for a mass membership party to have an electoral impact. There's been lots of talk about mass parties dying out and politics becoming, PR-driven and so on. But obviously, the desire of members to go and knock on doors and try and persuade people face-to-face had a tangible impact in lots of seats. And this is also where Momentum came into its own, because when we just had the session earlier on about persuasion canvassing, it's just remarkable that the Labour Party had this incredible resource of hundreds of thousands of new members, and put as little effort as you could possibly imagine into actually training them on what to do to win an election, presumably because they didn't want them to be effective in that way. And so it was left to Momentum to organise campaign days and to galvanise people to go to marginal seats with the nearest marginal tool and so on, which was really crucial. I think most of all, though, the most important feature of the election result is that it was possible to gain votes standing on a left-wing platform. And we had that moment in the middle of the election when the manifesto was leaked by somebody in Kezia Dugdale's office to try and make sure it would be undermined at the Clause 5 meeting, and basically a completely malicious act and a complete act of sabotage. But it backfired because people actually liked the manifesto, and all the polling showed it had huge support. And that was the pivotal moment, I think, of the election, when everything started to turn around, the movement started to galvanise, the opinion polls started to go up, and this surge began to happen. Labour gained more than 5 million voters in 2017. I mean, the overall total went up 3-point-something million. If you take off those who voted Labour in 2015 but not 2017, the total new people who voted Labour was 5 million, which is a lot. And I think that broke the spell of 1983, because there had been this idea that, based on Michael Foot's experience, if you go to the electorate with a left-wing platform, you're going to be annihilated. And I think that boxed out some space for progressive politics in this country, which just wasn't there before. And I mean, this is a Momentum audience, so I don't need to persuade you, but even if I'm talking to a CLP or something, even if you're on the right of the Labour Party, it doesn't really matter what part of the Labour Party you're on. I think that effect of just boxing out some space where progressive ideas can be discussed and can be taken seriously is a really fundamental achievement, which the Corbyn movement can claim quite a lot of credit for, but it benefits everybody, no matter what wing of the Labour Party they're on. And the remarkable thing about that, of course, is that the manifesto was essentially the same policy platform as Corbyn had stood for leader in 2015. If you look, Andrew Fisher wrote Corbyn's leadership policies in 2015. If you look back through his policy papers then, they're basically the same as the 2017 manifesto with some refinements, compromises on things like Trident, but big things like national investment bank, rent controls, scrapping tuition fees, all of those were in Corbyn's leadership campaign. And it's just amazing that Labour could win 40% of the vote basically on Jeremy Corbyn's leadership platform. So the fact that we can trace all this stuff, the fact that Jeremy Corbyn's, the Corbyn phenomenon didn't come from nowhere, I think should give us hope. When the economic orthodoxy can no longer deliver, it means political turbulence always follows. That doesn't guarantee that the left will win, but it does mean that there is a chance. And we know that it wasn't enough to get Jeremy Corbyn as leader. He had to be constantly defended ever since. So it won't be enough to get him as Prime Minister either. It will require even bigger mobilisations then. But look at the opportunity which is before us. When history offers up such an opportunity, I don't think you don't get the chance to kind of and ah about it and be indecisive. There's only really one option. You have to seize it. So that's my contribution. There's lots more in my book which you can buy over there for £10 if you want to. There's a whole chapter in here slagging off the media, which I realised after I wrote it wasn't a good idea for getting reviews and things. So if you want to buy it, and do buy it, and then read it and like it, then please spread the word, because I'm relying on word of mouth dissemination. Thank you very much.
Is it possible in any way to see how the working class can look to the outside world, in other words, cooperate with other movements outside Britain to see how they can change not only Britain but the whole world in general? Thanks.
Establishment is shaken. I think you're saying can the working class be internationalist, essentially? I think the thing is, we're starting from such a low base. I mean, these debates have been happening for over 100 years on the left. And at one point, there was a genuine international workers' movement. And we've been pushed so far back from that, especially since the 1980s. The way I see Corbynism is that we're just on the foothills of starting to go back. So the manifesto, for example, in 2017, was not a socialist document, it was a social democratic document. There were just basic social democratic demands in there. But in the context of British politics, they were extremely radical and they broke the consensus that had been, oppressive since Thatcher. And so I think that those small victories, you can't get to the top of the mountain without starting to climb it. So I think those small victories and that kind of breakthrough for a Jeremy Corbyn government could start to get back to the position where we're talking about some kind of internationalist working class. But you're right, that's not the case at the moment.
When social democracy across Europe and elsewhere is in decline, what is it about the Labour Party that seems to allow it to go in the opposite direction, to grow enthusiastically now? Is it simply a question of policies, getting the right policies, or is there something else happening in your mind that will explain the phenomenon here, distinguish us from France, from Spain, from so many other countries in Europe?
Had the phenomenon of personification, which I can actually say I practiced it because I had where effectively the Greek Labour Party, PASOK, collapsed because it implemented austerity, and then Syriza in 2015, well in 2012 and 2015, came from nowhere, literally 4% of the vote, to become the dominant party on the left. And then, I mean, that was an extreme example because Greece was basically subjected to this economic experiment by the EU. But the same phenomenon then repeated across Europe, and we've seen it in France, in Germany, in Spain, of the Social Democratic Party, basically, which has become a neoliberal party, collapsing in its support because it's acting against the interests of its traditional voters. And in response, new left parties emerge, but also parties on the right emerge, but new left parties emerge. In Europe, that leads to two separate parties because of the proportional representation system. In Britain, we've had it all going through the Labour Party, and that's why the British experience is unique. And the fact that Labour just got 40% in an election suggests that it's preferable to do it that way. It's preferable for the left, the anti-austerity movement, if you like, to express itself through the established party of government and the established centre-left party. I'm not sure that that means it's possible for other European countries to do that, because I mean, in Germany there's so big debate about this exact thing before they rejoin the coalition with Merkel, and lots of people were saying, look at the Labour Party, you know, they've taken a different path, and it's worked for them. Why can't we do that? But there are obviously political forces in Germany and the traditions, and the fact that they've got a competitive party, the Linke, to their left, or whatever it's called now, means that they just weren't able to do it in Germany. So it's not like the formula can just be repeated everywhere else. But I think the reason why Britain has been different is largely because of the first past the post system, and the fact that that's resulted in the Labour Party being the dominant hegemonic force on the left for so long, especially because of its link with the trade unions. And that's really played out in our favour in this country.
Around the time of the election, up to then, the press had all said Jeremy is unelectable. Out of the question, couldn't get elected, and we were wasting our time supporting him. After the election, suddenly that all stopped, everything changed, and a lot of people, including Labour supporters, who had thought that he wasn't all that impressive and couldn't be a real leader, suddenly decided that he'd changed. And I think he had changed. He became much more of a father figure, if you like, a real leader. Do you have any comments on these points?
For himself changed. If you go back to 2015, because a lot of people said, oh, Jeremy Corbyn's a very different politician now and so on. If you actually go back to 2015 to the leadership election and you watch the first televised hustings, which was on Newsnight in the first week after he got on the ballot, he storms it. It's remarkable. It's BBC live hustings held in a church in Nuneaton in the Sweden constituency, where the audience weren't all Labour voters. There were people who said that they might vote Labour, but they were swing voters. So you had UKIP voters and Tory voters and so on. And that's where, if you just believe the iron rule of the commentariat, Liz Kendall should have done the best, because she's supposed to be the centrist candidate who appeals to swing voters in Middle England. And, well, it's not just her Yvette Cooper and Andy Burnham would just make the silence with nearly everything they said. And Jeremy Corbyn just gave his unprepared, honest answers to the questions that he was faced with. And people were like cheering in the aisles. It was remarkable. You go back and watch it. At one point, they say, one of the questions asks, how can Labour move on from the legacy of Tony Blair? And you just get platitudes from the other three candidates, like Labour has to move forwards, not backwards, it has to go in all directions. And Yvette Cooper said, I'm today's and tomorrow's Labour, I want to leave behind old Labour. And then Jeremy Corbyn just said, why did Tony Blair get so close to George Bush that we ended up in an illegal war in Iraq? And the whole place like clapped. And Laura Kongsberg was the presenter, she was trying to interrupt him like we was clapping, and she said, I don't think, some people might think it's not worth going back to the debates of 2003. And you think, well, these are swing voters, they think it's worth going back to. So I don't think that he's necessarily changed that much. I think he's actually always been pretty good at communicating. What he does is he's not a great orator, but he manages to tap into a sense of collective morality, if you like, and express that in a way that people can understand without using jargon. And I think he's always been able to do that.
The things that you were pushing was essentially the bankruptcy of neoliberal economics. Certainly, I think one reason that Corbyn won in 2015 was that the other three, Cooper, Burnham and Kendall, actually had no policies about anything. They really didn't, and Corbyn did, and it showed, and that was, I think, really important. But suppose you agree, suppose you really say, okay, neoliberal economics, it's had its day, and there's mass revulsion and so on. But Brexit is going to be a really convenient distraction in that context, because it totally occupies government, the civil service, and so on. And that's likely to be the case for at least another 18 months, regardless of what one's views of the outcome is. It may be that Brexit, instead of ripping the Tory party apart, actually just might keep us in power.
Did Brexit open up what's politically possible? I think that's an interesting question. I think it's the other way around. I think Brexit is a feature of the fact that politics is in turmoil and the economic consensus has failed and that there's all these strange phenomena happening, and it's not just on the left, it's also on the right, and I think Brexit is part of that. At least a certain amount of Brexit was part of that. I mean, I think in the sense that can also then amplify that feeling, then it certainly shakes the establishment and brings to the fore the possibility that voting can change things, which, remember, in the New Labour era, there was quite a widespread consensus that all politicians were saying you couldn't change anything by voting.
What are your feelings on mandatory reselection, and do you think that is necessary to win the next election?
Jeremy Corbyn, even though he's been leader of the party, he's never been in control of it, as people probably know. If you look back to the time before the general election, I mean, some of the things that went on were just extraordinary. So when the Copeland by-election came out, you had the party bureaucracy leaking canvassing returns, showing that Labour was going to lose the Copeland by-election, which then Labour lost, which was electoral sabotage. You had them leaking a focus group and opinion poll of Northern voters' reactions to Rebecca Long Bailey and Angela Rayner, designed essentially to destroy their confidence, which was an opinion poll which was not even seen by John McDonnell, it was only a very small group of people who had seen it. So they know who leaked it. So you had all of this stuff going on. We've had the anti-Semitism furore recently, where lots of people have been stuck in a disciplinary system which is completely dysfunctional, which has been presided over by individuals. So, and that's before we talk about the coup and all of that stuff. So, if you try and imagine being Jeremy Corbyn and leading a party where your own bureaucracy is out to get you, and it's quite a difficult situation to be in. So, it should make quite a big difference, and especially when you come to an election, you have a completely different electoral strategy from that machine, and you can't get to do what you want. So it should make a huge difference, and I think what we're seeing at the moment actually is a kind of scorched earth strategy. A lot of people have given in their notice in HQ, now leaking something just about every day. For example, we had that 17,000 members have left the Labour Party over anti-Semitism, even though the figures are 6 months delayed, so it can't possibly be that. That's a leak from HQ. And I think it's because people are leaving, they haven't got any reason not to. That's why I think 2 people have just been told not to come back to work, just go to stay at home and pay you. But the trouble is, obviously, it's been, not trouble, but one thing which is maybe to be wary of is it's been a reasonably convenient excuse to be able to blame him and Nicol for everything for 2 years. And once Jenny Formby's in post properly and everything's running smoothly, then everything will be down to the leadership. There will be a need to actually get things sorted out and to stop messing it up. So yeah, we'll see how that goes. But I think it's a really big development, because I think that's been one of the features that's hobbled Corbyn's leadership for 2 years. What changes? Mandatory reselection. Well, I mean, if you read The Observer yesterday, it seems that there's no need for mandatory reselection because they're going to do it themselves. The trouble is, I mean, it's finely balanced. I mean, personally, on principle, I'm in favour of mandatory reselection because I can't understand why any MP would have a job for life. But you can see the political calculation of if MPs believe that they're not going to get reselected, then there's nothing to stop them from setting up a new party. And obviously, a new party is only going to have to take a few % off Labour's total to potentially make a difference between Labour being in government and Labour not being in government. So it's a finely balanced political judgment, I think. But you know, they don't. People like John Woodcock tend to make the case for those who are in favour of mandatory reselection. The bankruptcy of neoliberal economics and the fact the right has no policies. Actually, your question was about Brexit distracting from neoliberal failure. I think it's really hard. Personally, I think it's really hard to tell how Brexit's going to play out. You could argue that it's a kind of unique historical circumstance in which Labour could actually benefit because you had the spectacle of the CBI back in Jeremy Corbyn over Theresa May recently, which would normally happen. And you can see how it was interesting. I thought in the 2015 general election that there was no real intervention against Labour from either the state, in terms of deep state or whatever you want to call it, or business. And I don't know whether that's because they just assumed Jeremy Corbyn was going to lose or Labour was going to lose, so they didn't need to do anything, or whether it's because they weren't actually particularly happy with the idea of a big Tory majority doing the hardest possible Brexit. I'm not sure. So you could also say, you said that Brexit might help the Tories electorally. The Tory vote in 2015 was really dependent on the fact that they absorbed 50% of UKIP voters. And they're with the Tories essentially because of the Tory position on Brexit. And so if, depending on how Brexit goes, it's quite easy to see that coalition falling apart. Those people deserting the Tories. You know, either way, even if it goes through and it's all done, then I think I don't need to vote Tory. If they wreck it, if the Tories mess it up or, you know, in their view, capitulate or whatever, they could have the same opinion. So I'm not a fortune teller, so I don't know how it's going to play out, but I think there's just too many variables to come to any firm view on that. Winning over people who are sceptical of the JC in local party and local region. I mean, the London Regional Director is one of those who's just left with the change of regime, so that should be different. As somebody else said, the election did win over quite a lot of people, but there are obviously still some people who are irreconcilable, and I don't suppose that there's any way of making them irreconcilable, because they have different politics, I guess. So I think it's been a slower progression for the left within the party, I think, everywhere, than people expected. You know, maybe people thought it was going to be a big bang straight after Jeremy Corbyn got elected leader, but that hasn't happened. But it has happened incrementally, and you have had the occasion where over 70% of the delegates at last year's conference were from the left, and lots more CLP officer positions are being people from the left. Council candidates a little bit behind that, but still some from the left. The current selection process in marginal seats is resulting in about 50-50 between left and right, but then there's an incumbency factor where people who stood for the seat before are getting reselected almost always. So, so I think it is happening, it's just taking longer than people thought. And then finally, are people more intelligent than the media? Definitely. I mean, one of the interesting things about the Corbyn movement is that it does thrive on adversity, and when those attacks came in, especially internally in the party, was, I think, really useful. And one of the worrying things in the aftermath of the general election was that people weren't slandering us anymore. But they started slandering us again now. So we could be back to. I think it depends. Things like the anti-Semitism stuff, I think they're really damaging and they're hard to deal with because there is an actual underlying issue there which needs to be dealt with, so it can't just be dismissed. But things like the Czech spy story, I think, are brilliant for the left, because even though there's a percentage of the population who read the Daily Mail and so on who believe that this is true, most people just think this is ridiculous. And I think that helps galvanise the movement, and it helps persuade people that the media is against Jeremy Corbyn. I think Labour needs to come out with a media plurality draft bill saying that they're going to break up the big media empires. And then any attacks that come in can be said, well, you're just defending your business interests.
Yeah. Issue about the media. I wanted to ask, why is it that obviously you guys were all aware that the BBC is very biased and anti-Labour and anti-Corbyn, and a couple of times you and Owen and a couple of other lefties have been able to get on some of the BBC programmes. Why is it that you guys just don't get to a position where you just stop going and release a statement and say why you guys are not going on any more BBC kind of programmes?
The thing is, you can't really boycott the BBC because it's got such massive reach through its both website, TV and radio. So I think that it would be just cutting off your nose to spite your face if people stop going on. I do think though there's an opportunity to campaign for the democratisation of the BBC, for a more democratic structure and for it to be more responsive. And there's a guy called Tom Mills who wrote a book about BBC called, I can't remember the title of it, Myth of a Public Service, which is really good. And he's going to launch something soon, I think, about this, some kind of campaign, which I think Labour should adopt. Because, as somebody at the front said as well, you know, this is a public service, it's paid for by the licence payers, but its history has always been as basically a kind of state broadcaster at arm's length. But there's still the potential there to try and, especially with new media and online and so on, there's still the potential to transform it into something better if Labour ever got in power. So I think that's the kind of direction that we should be going in. But anyway, I mean, I am actually, you know, de facto boycotting the BBC because they don't invite me. So.
I've been talking about what kind of socialism Jeremy stands for with friends who work in political theory and political philosophy. And some view, I mean, the question that is often put to me is he more Benite or more left populist? That's the question. And I'd like your views on that.
What kind of socialism does Jeremy Corbyn stand for? Is he a Benite or a left populist? I think he's more of a Benite than Tony Benn, in my view. Because Tony Benn, actually this was probably more true in 2015 than now, but whereas Tony Benn espoused participatory grassroots politics, he was, you know, an amazing orator and the kind of guy who inspired personal devotion. And Jeremy Corbyn really wasn't that, at least in 2015. And it was genuinely people coming together for the politics of it, rather than for his kind of personal qualities, I think, although his personal qualities helped. And it was, especially in 2015, much more of a participatory movement. I mean, the policies at one point were being crowdsourced. They were asking people to send in their ideas. I think some of that participative potential has been lost since Jeremy Corbyn became leader, and I think that's a shame, and I think it's something that they should try and revive. But I think certainly the answer to the question is Benite. I'm not sure about this left populist stuff. I don't really see him as that left populist. I mean, the left populist will probably be giving in on foreign affairs all the time, and at least not presenting it in the way he's presenting it. So I'd say Benite. I'm not sure what the best way forward is, because there's been a trade-off, hasn't there, between democracy and effectiveness. At a conference last year, Momentum was extremely effective at organising delegates, first of all getting delegates picked, and then organising them at conference to win votes. You know, an astonishing success that was. One of the features, I think, of the Corbyn movement is that it's really excellent in a crisis, when Jeremy's position is threatened, or when there's a general election, it's excellent. In between times, it can seem to go into a bit of a lull. If you look at surveys from Pew, for example, they find that about 7% of the British population has attitudes you could call anti-Semitic. They have animus towards Jews. And that's been repeated in several surveys. And YouGov did a survey, found exactly the same. 7% of the British population didn't like Jews. If you apply that 7% to the Labour Party, that would be 40,000 people. 7% of 570,000 members would be 40,000 people. There aren't 40,000 anti-Semites in the Labour Party. Yeah. So the Labour Party is almost certainly less anti-Semitic than society as a whole. John Mann, who's the most outspoken on this issue, he said recently that there are between 2,000 and 5,000 anti-Semites in the Labour Party. That was his estimate. It's quite an interesting estimate because one number's more than twice the other number. But anyway, let's take his top figure, 5,000. That's 1%, I think, of Labour Party members. The actual number going through the disciplinary system is 375 or something. There are obviously more than that out there because we keep seeing examples being brought to the fore. But I don't think you can reasonably argue on the basis of the evidence that the Labour Party is more anti-Semitic than British society as a whole. That said, the Labour Party should be 0% anti-Semitic because the Labour Party is an anti-racist party. So just saying, well, at least we're not as racist as the right wing, or we're not as racist as the Tories, or we're not as racist as British society is not good enough. And that's why there has to be this effort of education, but also explaining people where they have been anti-Semitic, and that has to be ongoing. So it's one of those issues. It's not going to be just a quick fix. I think it's a process that the Labour Party is going to have to go through.
Thank you so much, Alex.